It's going to be real thick or leathery in its appearance. Those cotyledons that are normally real, pliable, they're going to be stiff. Now, as you're going through and trying to look at some of this stuff, the thing is almost every one of these are zoonotic, meaning that we get them. Okay, so double glove, at least wear a single pair.
Haven't we had them?
But
you had chlamydia?
sir,
If we haven't had them, if we've had hundreds of chlamydia.
oh, but the one thing that, especially in sheep and mingo science, when I've got, in that and in lambing class, it scares me to death with all these girls that we have coming in, and it just, with all these different diseases that we've got access to, impacting their future, that scares me to death. So we try to stress, be as clean as we can. Now, we can vaccinate for chlamydia. There's a vaccine that will vaccinate 60 and 30 days out prior to breeding. And then you'll want a booster 30 days prior to and every subsequent year. Okay.
30 days prior to breeding,
prior to breeding. And so again, this is one of those things I think that if we can control it before breeding, then we're going to be okay through gestation.
And if you're accelerating, would you have to do it 60 and 30 days prior to breeding?
That's a good question.
I think annual is all it is.
I would go back and I'll ask Shelley and see, but I would hope. However, there's another vaccine that it talks about. If you really want to truly be effective against this particular disease that it's talking about, that we've got to be every 6 months. So, but I think the role or the key in a lot of these vaccines, people will call me and say, well, what do I need to vaccinate my ewes for in terms of preventing abortion? Well, have you had any problems with abortion? No. Well, then why on earth do you want to introduce that agent into your flock? So unless you've had a problem or know that you've had a problem, I just encourage you to try to stay away from introducing it in some shape, form, or fashion. But once you do, let's go through and talk about vaccination programs. And so if you do vaccinate those animals, be sure that you're not vaccinating any ewes that could potentially be bred, because the chlamydial vaccine is one that we can get into some fetal defects and things like that. So if we get into an issue where you start seeing some of these cases of abortion and you realize that, and you kind of nail it down and say, hey, I'm pretty sure that we've got a case of chlamydia going on here, even if the diagnostics lab's not sending you something backlogged, go ahead and put them on a feed grade oxytetracycline of 300 to 500 grams or milligrams per head per day. And you can actually start that if you have a suspicion, 60 days prior to lambing, and go ahead and put that into their feed. And that's coming straight out of Dr. Laffman's notes there. Now, when we get into Vibrio, this is one of her other tops on her list. It's a major cause of problems in sheep. It can be found in the microflora of GI tract of dogs, sheep, birds, and then we actually have some ewes that are carrying this disease in their gallbladder, and so they're constantly kind of a source of infection. But typically, via ingestion or if they get around an aborted fetus or placenta, then they can also pick that bacteria up there as well. So if you get into a naive flock, you can see an abortion rate of 70 to 90%. So that can get pretty scary. You lose a lamb crop, and it's obviously devastating. But generally 20% of those abortions are going to happen after 95 days of gestation. And so
When do the rest of them happen?
Well, actually, if I remember, and I'm going to refer back to my notes so I've got them exactly, but most of them occur the last 6 weeks, so it's still, but I don't know why that she specifically in her notes was talking about the 20%. It may have been, I can't remember exactly what that 20% of those particular abortions, or if it's something else. I'll have to go back and double check on that. Cool. Edematous placenta, meaning that it's swollen, there's fluid, extra fluid there. You've got a placental and a fetal liver. Most of these, as I look through and they're asking what can be sent in, and I just talked to a vet when I was in San Antonio at the wool contest this year, or Saturday, was that if we can get placenta and fetal livers, most of the time that's the tissues that they can test and determine the most from. They actually, some of them will ask for the fetus, and that's the confusing part for me. When I look in here, this book says fetus, but every veterinarian and every diagnostician I've ever talked to has said, send us placental membranes. That's what we can determine the most from. You're going to see a little bit of a transient diarrhea in ewes. Those ewes, again, are going to return back to normal after aborting, be used the next season, just like what we saw in the chlamydia case. However, this is going to be a little different. You know, we've got a Vibrio vaccine for cattle. Well, that Vibrio vaccine is not going to work on your sheep because it's species specific. And so be sure that you're not using a Vibrio vaccine if you're working on your sheep.
Where do those vaccines come from? Colorado?
Most of them are Colorado serum. And this one, let me see. This one is a Colorado serum, the fetus bacterium. And then they actually have another product called Enzabort, which is it's both a Vibrio and a chlamydia vaccine.
Brian, how are those derived, or how are they made? Where do they get their samples?
I'm not sure. It's a killed vaccine. On one here in a little bit, you'll be looking at a killed virus. But these are bacteria, so I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't tell us. They've got a pretty substantial withholding period, so you can't, give it to a bunch of ewes, and if they lose lambs, you can't just haul them off and sell one right away.
I think they update their maps on an annual basis.
On an annual basis?
Well, I mean, they've got the old batch, but if somebody finds something, which is hard to do, but if they find something here in Kansas, I think they will send a portion of that and throw it in there.
In most of those cases, if you know what you've got, you can have some of these companies make you a custom.
I know on the Thorman, that's the way Dr. Edmiston thought they did down there at Texas Labs or whatever.
At A&M Lab, that's a lot of times we'd take our own scabs. When we had pneumonia outbreaks, we'd send buccal tissues and stuff like that into those labs, and they'd culture it. But again, it's a 30 days prior to breeding, but this is actually a 60 days later. So you're going to give them this vaccine followed up while they're pregnant. And so you'll give them an annual booster, again 2 to 4 weeks prior to breeding. However, the effectiveness is a little questionable. Dr. Claflin said, it's not a 100% deal. You're going to get some of it, it's going to be okay. But like we said earlier, don't use it unless you really had the problem.
Well, in a commercial flock like mine,